Chapter 21 of Là-bas by Joris-Karl Huysmans. Translated by Keen Wallace. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Durtal had resolved not to answer Madame Chantelouve's letters. Every day, since their rupture, she had sent him an inflamed missive, but, as he soon noticed, her Maeonid cries were subsiding into plaints and reproaches. She now accused him of ingratitude, and repented having listened to him and having permitted him to participate in sacrileges for which she would have to answer before the heavenly tribunal. She pleaded to see him once more. Then she was silent for a whole week. Finally, tired, no doubt, of writing unanswered letters, she admitted in a last epistle that all was over. After agreeing with him that their temperaments were incompatible, she ended, "Thanks for the trig little love, ruled like music paper, that you gave me. My heart cannot be so straightly measured, it requires more latitude." "Her heart!" he laughed. Then he continued to read, "I understand that it is not your earthly mission to satisfy my heart, but you might at least have conceded me a frank comradeship which would have permitted me to leave my sex at home and to come and spend an evening with you now and then. This, seemingly so simple, you have rendered impossible. Farewell forever. I have only to renew my pact with solitude, to which I have tried to be unfaithful." With solitude! And that complacent and paternal cuckold, her husband! Well, he is the one most to be pitied now. Thanks to me, he had evenings of quiet. I restored his wife, pliant and satisfied. He profited by my fatigues, that sacristan. Ah, when I think of it, his sly, hypocritical eyes, when he looked at me, told me a great deal. Well, the little romance is over. It's a good thing to have your heart on strike. In my brain I still have a house of ill fame, which sometimes catches fire, but the hired myrmidons will stamp out the blaze in a hurry. When I was young and ardent, the women laughed at me. Now that I'm old and stale, I laugh at them. That's more in my character, old fellow," he said to the cat, which, with ears pricked up, was listening to the soliloquy. "Truly, Gilles de Rais is a great deal more interesting than Madame Chantelouve. Unfortunately, my relations with him are also drawing to a close. Only a few more pages and the book is done. Oh, Lord, here comes Rateau to knock my house to pieces." Sure enough, the concierge entered, made an excuse for being late, took off his vest, and cast a look of defiance at the furniture. Then he hurled himself at the bed, grappled with the mattress, got a half Nelson on it, and, balancing himself, turning half around, hurled it onto the springs. Durtal, followed by his cat, went into the other room, but suddenly Rateau ceased wrestling and came and stood before Durtal. "Monsieur, do you know what has happened?" he blubbered. "Why, no." "My wife has left me." "Left you? But she must be over 60." Rateau raised his eyes to heaven. "And she ran off with another man?" Rateau, disconsolate, let the feather duster fall from his listless hand. "The devil! Then in spite of her age your wife had needs which you were unable to satisfy?" The concierge shook his head and finally succeeded in saying, "It was the other way around." "Oh," said Durtal, considering the old caricature, shrivelled by bad air and 3-6. "But if she is tired of that sort of thing, why did she run off with a man?" Rateau made a grimace of pitying contempt. "Oh, he's impotent. Good for nothing." "Ah." "It's my job I'm sore about. The landlord won't keep a concierge that hasn't a wife." "Dear Lord," thought Durtal, "how hast thou answered my prayers?" "Come on, let's go over to your place," he said to Des Hermies, who, finding Rateau's key in the door, had walked in. "Righto. Since your house cleaning isn't done yet, descend like a god from your clouds of dust, and come on over to the house." On the way, Durtal recounted his concierge's conjugal misadventure. "Oh," said Des Hermies, "many a woman would be happy to wreathe with laurel the occiput of so combustible a sexagenarian. Look at that. Isn't it revolting?" pointing to the walls covered with posters. It was a veritable debauch of placards. Everywhere on lurid coloured paper, in box-car letters, were the names of Boulanger and Jacques. "Thank God, this will be over tomorrow." "There is one resource left," said Des Hermies. "To escape the horrors of present-day life, never raise your eyes. Look down at the sidewalk always. preserving the attitude of timid modesty. When you look only at the pavement, you see the reflections of the sky, signs in all sorts of fantastic shapes, alchemic symbols, talismanic characters, bizarre pentacles with suns, hammers and anchors, and you can imagine yourself right in the midst of the Middle Ages. Yes, but to keep from seeing the disenchanting crowd you would have to wear a long visored cap, like a jockey, and blinkers like a horse. Des Elmy sighed. "Come in," he said, opening the door. They went in, and sitting down in easy chairs, they lighted their cigarettes. "I haven't got over that conversation we had with Gévingey the other night at Carré's," said Durtal. "Strange man, that Dr. Johannès. I can't keep from thinking about him. Look here, do you sincerely believe in his miraculous cures?" "I am obliged to. I didn't tell you all about him, for a physician can't lightly make these dangerous admissions. But you may as well know that this priest heals hopeless cases. I got acquainted with him when he was still a member of the Parisian clergy. It came about by one of those miracles of his which I don't pretend to understand. My mother's maid had a granddaughter who was paralyzed in her arms and legs and suffered death and destruction in her chest and howled when you touched her there. She had been in this condition 2 years. It had come on in one night. How produced, nobody knows. She was sent away from the Lyons hospitals as incurable. She came to Paris, underwent treatment at La Salpêtrière, and was discharged when nobody could find out what was the matter with her nor what medication would give her any relief. One day she spoke to me of this Abbé Johannès, who, she said, had cured persons in as bad shape as she. I did not believe a word, but hearing that the priest refused to take any money for his services, I did not dissuade her from visiting him, and out of curiosity I went along. They placed her in a chair. The ecclesiastic, little, active, energetic, took her hand and applied to it, one after the other, 3 precious stones. Then he said coolly, 'Mademoiselle, you are the victim of consanguinal sorcery.' I could hardly keep from laughing. 'Remember,' he said, 2 years back, for that is when your paralytic stroke came on. You must have had a quarrel with a kinsman or kinswoman.' It was true. Poor Marie had been unjustly accused of the theft of a watch, which was an heirloom belonging to an aunt of hers. The aunt had sworn vengeance. 'Your aunt lives in Lyons?' She nodded. 'Nothing astonishing about that,' continued the priest. 'In Lyons, among the lower orders, there are witch doctors who know a little about the witchcraft practised in the country. But be reassured, these people are not powerful. They know little more than the ABCs of the art. Then, mademoiselle, you wish to be cured?' And after she replied that she did, he said gently, 'That is all. You may go.' He did not touch her, did not prescribe any remedy. I came away persuaded that he was a mountebank. But when, 3 days later, the girl was able to raise her arms, and all her pain had left her, and when, at the end of a week, she could walk, I had to yield in face of the evidence. I went back to see him, had occasion to do him a service, and thus our relations began. But what are his methods? He opens, like the curate of Ars, with prayer. Then he evokes the militant archangels. Then he breaks the magic circles and classes, as he says, the spirits of evil. I know very well that this is confounding. Whenever I speak of this man's potency to my confrères, they smile with a superior air or serve up to me the specious arguments which they have fabricated to explain the cures wrought by Christ and the Virgin. The method they have imagined consists in striking the patient's imagination, suggesting to him the will to be cured, persuading him that he is well, hypnotizing him in a waking state, so to speak. This done, say they, the twisted legs straighten, the sores disappear, the consumption-torn lungs are patched up, the cancers become benign pimples, and the blind eyes see. This procedure they attribute to miracle workers to explain away the supernatural. Why don't they use the method themselves if it is so simple? But haven't they tried? After a fashion. I was present myself at an experiment attempted by Dr. Louis. It was inspiring. At the Charity Hospital there was a poor girl paralyzed in both legs. She was put to sleep and commanded to rise. She struggled in vain. Then 2 interns held her up in a standing posture, but her lifeless legs bent useless under her weight. Need I tell you that she could not walk, and that after they had held her up and pushed her along a few steps, they put her to bed again, having obtained no result whatever? But Dr. Johannes does not cure all sufferers without discrimination. No, he will not meddle with any ailments which are not the result of spells. He says he can do nothing with natural ills, which are the province of the physician. He is a specialist in satanic affections. He has most to do with the possessed whose neuroses have proved obdurate to hydrotherapeutic treatment. What does he do with the precious stones you mentioned? First, before answering your question, I must explain the significance and virtue of these stones. I shall be telling you nothing new when I say that Aristotle, Pliny, all the sages of antiquity, attributed medical and divine virtues to them. According to the pagans, agate and carnelian stimulate, topaz consoles, jasper cures languor, hyacinth drives away insomnia, turquoise prevents falls or lightens the shock, amethyst combats drunkenness. Catholic symbolism, in its turn, takes over the precious stones and sees in them emblems of the Christian virtues. Then sapphire represents the lofty aspirations of the soul, chalcedony charity, sard and onyx candour, beryl allegorizes theological science, hyacinth humility, while the ruby appeases wrath, and emerald lapidifies incorruptible faith. Now, in magic, Des Hermies rose and took from a shelf a very small volume bound like a prayer book. He showed Durtal the title, Natural Magic, or The Secrets and Miracles of Nature, in 4 volumes, by Giambattista Porta of Naples, Paris. Nicolas Bonjour, Rue Neuve Notre-Dame, at the sign Saint-Nicolas, 1584. Natural magic, said Des Hermies, which was merely the medicine of the time, ascribes a new meaning to gems. Listen to this. After first celebrating an unknown stone, the alectorius, which renders its possessor invincible if it has been taken out of the stomach of a cock caponized 4 years before, or if it has been ripped out of the ventricle of a hen, Porta informs us that chalcedony wins lawsuits, that carnelian stops bloody flux and is exceeding useful to women who are sick of their flower, that hyacinth protects against lightning and keeps away pestilence and poison, that topaz quells lunatic passions, that turquoise is of advantage against melancholy, quartan fever, and heart failure. He attests finally that sapphire preserves courage and keeps the members vigorous, while emerald, hung about one's neck, keeps away St. John's evil, and breaks when the wearer is unchaste. You see, antique philosophy, medieval Christianity, and 16th century magic do not agree on the specific virtues of every stone. Almost in every case the significations, more or less far-fetched, differ. Dr. Johannes has revised these beliefs, adopted and rejected great numbers of them. Finally he has, on his own authority, admitted new acceptations. According to him, amethyst does cure drunkenness, but moral drunkenness, pride. Ruby relieves sex pressure. Beryl fortifies the will. Sapphire elevates the thoughts and turns them toward God. In brief, he believes that every stone corresponds to a species of malady, and also to a class of sins, and he affirms that when we have chemically got possession of the active principle of gems, we shall have not only antidotes but preventatives. While waiting for this chimerical dream to be realized, and for our medicine to become the mock of lapidary chemists, he uses precious stones to formulate diagnoses of illnesses produced by sorcery. How? He claims that when such or such a stone is placed in the hand or on the affected part of the bewitched, a fluid escapes from the stone into his hands, and that by examining this fluid he can tell what is the matter. In this connection he told me that a woman whom he did not know came to him one day to consult him about a malady, pronounced incurable, from which she had suffered since childhood. He could not get any precise answers to his questions. He saw no signs of venefice. After trying out his whole array of stones, he placed in her hand lapis lazuli, which, he says, corresponds to the sin of incest. He examined the stone. "Your malady," he said, "is the consequence of an act of incest." "Well," she said, "I did not come here to confessional," but she finally admitted that her father had violated her before she attained the age of puberty. That, of course, is against reason and contrary to all accepted ideas, but there is no getting around the fact that this priest cures patients whom we physicians have given up for lost. Such as the only astrologer Paris can now boast, the astounding Gévingey, who would have been dead without his aid. I wonder how Gévingey came to cast the Empress Eugénie's horoscope. Oh, I told you. Under the Empire, the Tuileries was a hotbed of magic. Home, the American, was revered as the equal of a god. In addition to spiritualistic seances, he evoked demons at court. One evocation had fatal consequences. A certain marquis, whose wife had died, implored Home to let him see her again. Home took him to a room, put him in bed, and left him. What ensued? What dreadful phantom rose from the tomb? Was the story of Ligeia reenacted? At any rate, the marquis was found dead at the foot of the bed. This story has recently been reported by Le Figaro from unimpeachable documents. You see, it won't do to play with the world's spirits of evil. I used to know a rich bachelor who had a mania for the occult sciences. He was president of a Theosophic Society, and he even wrote a little book on the esoteric doctrine in the Isis series. Well, he could not, like the Péladon and Papus tribe, be content with knowing nothing, so he went to Scotland, where diabolism is rampant. There he got in touch with the man who, if you stake him, will initiate you into the satanic arcana. My friend made the experiment. Did you see him whom Bulwer Lytton in Zanoni calls the dweller of the threshold? I don't know, but certain it is that he fainted from horror and returned to France exhausted, half dead. Evidently all is not rosy in that line of work, said Durtal, but it is only spirits of evil that can be evoked. Do you suppose that the angels, who, of earth, obey only the saints, would ever consent to take orders from the first comer? But there must be an intermediate order of angels, who are neither celestial nor infernal, who, for instance, commit the well-known asininities in the spiritist seances. A priest told me one day that the neuter larvae inhabit an invisible, neutral territory, something like a little island, which is besieged on all sides by the good and evil spirits. The larvae cannot long hold out and are soon forced into one or the other camp. Now, because it is these larvae they evoke, the occultists, who cannot, of course, draw down the angels, always get the ones who have joined the party of evil, so unconsciously and probably involuntarily the spiritist is always diabolizing. Yes, and if one admits the disgusting idea that an imbecile medium can bring back the dead, one must, in reason, recognize the stamp of Satan on these practices. However viewed, spiritism is an abomination. So you don't believe in theurgy, white magic? It's a joke. Only a Rosicrucian who wants to hide his more repulsive essays at black magic ever hints at such a thing. No one dare confess that he satanizes. The Church, not duped by these hair-splitting distinctions, condemns black and white magic indifferently. Well, said Durtal, lighting a cigarette, after a silence, this is a better topic of conversation than politics or the races, but where does it get us? Half of these doctrines are absurd, the other half so mysterious as to produce only bewilderment. Shall we grant Satanism? Well, gross as it is, it seems a sure thing. And if it is, and one is consistent, one must also grant Catholicism. For Buddhism and the like are not big enough to be substituted for the religion of Christ. All right. Believe. I can't. There are so many discouraging and revolting dogmas in Christianity. I am uncertain about a good many things myself, said Des Hermies, and yet there are moments when I feel that the obstacles are giving way, that I almost believe. Of one thing I am sure. The supernatural does exist, Christian or not. To deny it is to deny evidence, and who wants to be a materialist, one of these silly freethinkers? It is mighty tiresome to be vacillating forever. How I envy Carré his robust faith. You don't want much, said Des Hermies. Faith is the breakwater of the soul, affording the only haven in which dismastered man can glide along in peace. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Là-bas by Joris-Karl Huysmans, translated by Keen Wallace. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. You like that? Asked Madame Carré. For a change I served the broth yesterday and kept the beef for tonight. So we'll have vermicelli soup, a salad of cold meat with pickled herring and celery, some nice mashed potatoes au gratin, and a dessert. And then you shall taste the new cider we just got. Oh, and ah, exclaimed Des Hermies and Durtal, who, while waiting for dinner, were sipping the elixir of life. "Do you know, Madame Carré, your cooking tempts us to the sin of gluttony. If you keep on you will make perfect pigs of us." "Oh, you are joking. I wonder what is keeping Louis." "Somebody is coming upstairs," said Durtal, hearing the creaking of shoes in the tower. "No, it isn't his step." And she went and opened the door. "It's Monsieur Gévingey." And indeed, clad in his blue cape, with his soft black hat on his head, the astrologer entered, made a bow, like an actor taking a curtain call, nibbed his great knuckles against his massive rings, and asked where the bell ringer was. "He is at the carpenter's. The oak beams holding up the big bell are cracked, and Louis is afraid they will break down." "Any news of the election?" And Gévingey took out his pipe and filled it. "No, in this quarter we shan't know the results until nearly 10 o'clock. There's no doubt about the outcome, though, because Paris is strong for this democratic stuff. General Boulanger will win hands down. This certainly is the age of universal imbecility." Carré entered and apologized for being so late. While his wife brought in the soup, he took off his galoshes and said, in answer to his friend's questions, "Yes, the dampness had rusted the frets and warped the beams. It was time for the carpenter to intervene. He finally promised that he would be here tomorrow and bring his men without fail. Well, I am mighty glad to get back. In the streets everything whirls in front of my eyes. I am dizzy. I don't know what to do. The only places where I am at home are the belfry and this room. Here, wife, let me do that." And he pushed her aside and began to stir the salad. "How good it smells," said Durtal, drinking in the incisive tang of the herring. "Do you know what this perfume suggests? A basket-funnelled fireplace, twigs of juniper snapping in it, in a ground-floor room, opening onto a great harbour. It seems to me there is a sort of salt-water halo around these little rings of gold and rusted iron. Exquisite," he said as he tasted the salad. "We'll make it again for you, Monsieur Durtal," said Madame Carré. "You are not hard to please." "Alas," said her husband, "his palate isn't, but his soul is, when I think of his despairing aphorisms of the other night. However, we are praying God to enlighten him. I'll tell you," he said to his wife, "we will invoke Saint Nolasque and Saint Théodulus, who are always represented with bells. They sort of belong to the family, and they will certainly be glad to intercede for people who revere them and their emblems." "It would take a stunning miracle to convince Durtal," said Des Hermies. "Bells have been known to perform them," said the astrologer. "I remember to have read, though I forget where, that angels tolled the knell when Saint Isidro of Madrid was dying." "And there are many other cases," said Carré. "Of their own accord, the bells chimed when Saint Sigisbert chanted the De Profundus over the corpse of the martyr Placidus, and when the body of Saint Enemond, Bishop of Lyons, was thrown by his murderers into a boat without oars or sails, the bells rang out, though nobody set them in motion, as the boat passed down the Saône." "Do you know what I think?" asked Des Hermies, looking at Carré. "I think you ought to prepare a compendium of hagiography, or a really informative work on heraldry." "What makes you think that?" "Well, you are, thank God, remote from this epoch and fond of things which it knows nothing about or execrates, and a work of that kind would take you still further away. My good friend, you are the man forever unintelligible to the coming generations. To ring bells because you love them, to give yourself over to the abandoned study of feudal art or monasticism, would make you complete. Take you clear out of Paris, out of the world, back into the Middle Ages." "Alas," said Carré, "I am only a poor ignorant man. But the type you speak of does exist. In Switzerland, I believe, a bell ringer has for years been collecting material for a heraldic memorial. I should think," he continued laughing, "that his avocation would interfere with his vocation." "And do you think," said Gévingey bitterly, "that the profession of astrologer is less decried, less neglected?" "How do you like our cider?" asked the bell ringer's wife. "Do you find it a bit raw?" "No, it's tart if you sip it, but sweet if you take a good mouthful," answered Durtal. "Wife, serve the potatoes. Don't wait for me. I delayed so long getting my business done that it's time for the Angelus. Don't bother about me. Go on eating. I shall catch up with you when I get back." and as her husband lighted his lantern and left the room, the woman brought in on a plate what looked to be a cake covered with golden brown caramel icing. "Mashed potatoes, I thought you said." "Au gratin, browned in the oven. Taste it. I put in everything that ought to make it very good." All exclaimed over it. Then it became impossible to hear oneself. Tonight the bell boomed out with unusual clarity and power. Durtal tried to analyze the sound which seemed to rock the room. There was a sort of flux and reflux of sound. First, the formidable shock of the clapper against the vase, then a sort of crushing and scattering of the sounds as if ground fine with the pestle, then a rounding of the reverberation, then the recoil of the clapper, adding, in the bronze mortar, other sonorous vibrations which it ground up and cast out and dispersed through the sounding shutters. Then the bell strokes came further apart. Now there was only the whirring as of a spinning wheel. A few crumbs were slow about falling. And now Carré returned. "It's a two-sided age," said Gévingey, pensive. "People believe nothing, yet gobble everything. Every day a new science is invented. Nobody reads that admirable Paracelsus, who rediscovered all that had ever been found, and created everything that had not. Say now to your Congress of Scientists that, according to this great master, life is a drop of the essence of the stars, that each of our organs corresponds to a planet and depends upon it, that we are in consequence a foreshortening of the divine sphere. Tell them, and this experience attests, that every man born under the sign of Saturn is melancholy and pituitous, taciturn and solitary, poor and vain, that the sluggish star predisposes to superstition and fraud, directs epilepsies and varices, hemorrhoids and leprosies, that it is, alas, the great purveyor to hospital and prison, and the scientists will shrug their shoulders and laugh at you. The glorified pedants and homiletic asses. Paracelsus, said Des Hermies, was one of the most extraordinary practitioners of occult medicine. He knew the now forgotten mysteries of the blood, the still unknown medical effects of light, professing, as did also the Kabbalists for that matter, that the human being is composed of three parts, a material body, a soul, and a perispirit, called also an astral body. He attended this last especially, and produced reactions on the carnal envelope by procedures which are either incomprehensible or fallen into disuse. He cared for wounds by treating not the tissues, but the blood which came out of them. However, we are assured that he healed certain ailments. Thanks to his profound knowledge of astrology, said Gévingey. But if the study of the sidereal influence is so important, said Durtal, why don't you take pupils? I can't get them. Where will you unearth people willing to study 20 years without glory or profit? Because, to be able to establish a horoscope, one must be an astronomer of the first order, know mathematics from top to bottom, and one must have put in long hours tussling with the obscure Latin of the old masters. Besides, you must have the vocation and the faith, and they are lost. Just the way it is with bell-ringing, said Carré. No, you see, messieurs, Gévingey went on, the day when the grand sciences of the Middle Ages fell foul of the systematic and hostile indifference of an impious people was the death day of the soul in France. All we can do now is fold our arms and listen to the wild vagaries of society, which by turns shrieks with farcical joy and bitter grief. We must not despair. A better time is coming, said Madame Carré in a conciliating tone, and before she retired she shook hands with all her guests. The people, said Des Hermies, pouring the water into the coffee-pot, instead of being ameliorated with time, grow, from century to century, more avaricious, abject, and stupid. Remember the siege, the commune, the unreasonable infatuations, the tumultuous hatreds, all the dementia of a deteriorated, malnourished people in arms. They certainly cannot compare with the naïf and tender-hearted plebes of the Middle Ages. Tell us, Durtal, how the people acted when Gilles de Rais was conducted to the stake. Yes, tell us, said Carré, his great eyes made watery by the smoke of his pipe. Well, you know, as a consequence of unheard-of crimes, the Marshal de Rais was condemned to be hanged and burned alive. After the sentence was passed, when he was brought back to his dungeon, he addressed a last appeal to the bishop, Jean de Malestroit, beseeching the bishop to intercede for him with the fathers and mothers of the children Gilles had so ferociously violated and put to death, to be present when he suffered. The people whose hearts he had lacerated wept with pity. They now saw in this demoniac noble only a poor man who lamented his crimes and was about to confront the divine wrath. The day of execution, by 9 o'clock, they were marching through the city in processional. They chanted psalms in the streets and took vows in the churches to fast 3 days, in order to help assure the repose of the Marshal's soul. "Pretty far, as you can see from American lynch law," said des Hermies. "Then," resumed Durtal, "at 11 they went to the prison to get Gilles de Rais, and accompanied him to the prairie of Las Bies, where tall stakes stood, surmounted by gibbets. The Marshal supported his accomplices, embraced them, adjured them to have great displeasure and contrition of their ill deeds, and, beating his breast, he supplicated the Virgin to spare them, while the clergy, the peasants, and the people joined in the psalmody, intoning the sinister and imploring strophes of the chant for the departed. Nos timemus diem iudicii, quia mali et nobis conscii, sed tu, mater summi concilii, para nobis locum refugii, O Maria. Tunc iratus, iudex, hurrah for Boulanger! The noise as of a stormy sea mounted from the Place Saint-Sulpice, and a hubbub of cries floated up to the tower room. Boulange, Lange! Then an enormous raucous voice, the voice of an oyster-woman, a push-cart peddler, rose, dominating all others, howling, "Hurrah for Boulanger!" "The people are cheering the election returns in front of the city hall," said Carré disdainfully. They looked at each other. "The people of today!" exclaimed des Hermies. "Ah," grumbled Gévingey, "they wouldn't acclaim a sage, an artist, that way, even, if such were conceivable now, a saint." "And they did in the Middle Ages." "Well, they were more naïf and not so stupid then," said des Hermies. "And as Gévingey says, where now are the saints who directed them? You cannot too often repeat it, the spiritual counsellors of today have tainted hearts, dysenteric souls, and slovenly minds, or they are worse. They corrupt their flock, they are of the Docre order and satanize. To think that a century of positivism and atheism has been able to overthrow everything but Satanism, and it cannot make Satanism yield an inch." "Easily explained," cried Carré. "Satan is forgotten by the great majority. Now it was Father Ravignon, I believe, who proved that the wiliest thing the devil can do is to get people to deny his existence." "Oh God!" murmured Durtal forlornly, "what whirlwinds of ordure I see on the horizon!" "No," said Carré, "don't say that. On earth all is dead and decomposed, but in heaven! Ah, I admit that the Paraclete is keeping us waiting, but the texts announcing his coming are inspired, the future is certain, there will be light." And with bowed head he prayed fervently. Des Hermies rose and paced the room. "All that is very well," he groaned, "but this century laughs the glorified Christ to scorn. It contaminates the supernatural and vomits on the beyond. Well, how can we hope that in the future the offspring of the fetid tradesmen of today will be decent? Brought up as they are, what will they do in life?" "They will do," replied Durtal, "as their fathers and mothers do now. They will stuff their guts and crowd out their souls through their alimentary canals." Finis. End of chapter 22. End of Là-bas by Joris-Karl Huysmans. Translated by Keen Wallace.